want to talk about and kick this off is, you heard the video at the beginning of the trailer is, the appreciation that the everyday AIs don't have meaningless buzzwords in their keynotes. So I'm going to do a keynote full of meaningless buzzwords. So let's rock. So all right, so the commodity AI trap. What do I want to talk about here today? The rush to Gen AI over this last, not quite 2 years, but we're getting close to that, right? Has created a lot of excitement, a lot of conversation, a lot of fear and uncertainty, but a lot of opportunity to bring a new technology into organizations of every industry, every stripe, to really sort of change how they're doing business and bring new things in. And when we look at the history of technological innovations, right, they can have big differentiators, right? Some companies will bring those in and really get ahead and become sort of new winners or pull ahead of their competition in the industry. But there's one industry that always wins out when new technology comes out: tech, right? There's always a lot of money that ends up going into tech. But the customers, the people who are buying that technology, don't always really reap the benefits. And that's what we're really going to talk about here today. And so the fear and the possible challenge is that, hey, look, and imagine, work with me on this graph here. Hopefully it makes sense, right? So on the bottom here, we have what I'm spending on AI. And on the vertical, I have what I'm actually getting from it, right? Better revenue, lower costs, something along those lines. So I start spending some money, and my competitor starts spending some money, and we look out, a couple years from now, and we've both spent a lot of money, and we've both brought in a bunch of new technology, and we're doing things differently, but we are basically have made some tech companies richer, and we're just keeping, pace with each other on what we're doing in terms of actually the changes and the impacts to us as an organization. And, personally being on the tech side, I'm okay with that, but I don't think that that's what we want for our customers, right? So how do you get out of this commodity technology, right, and actually make a difference in terms of what you're doing with your AI? So let's, essentially just walk through what that looks like and how do we sort of change it. So same idea here. We're both spending some money, but one company here is using its technology differently. They're using it better. They're using it more effectively. And then this is the story that you want to have, is that, hey, the industry as a whole, whatever your industry is, right? I don't care what it is. It will look different as these new technologies come in and impact it. But you want to be the one that is getting the value disproportionately compared to your competitors, so that you've both spent that same amount of money, but you have differentiated yourselves through the use of AI in this. So that's the hope. But what does that actually look like? Does it look like implementing an LLM and making an internal chatbot for all of your HR documents? Does anybody think that that's how we differentiate ourselves? No? OK. I won't make you raise your hands if your company has already done that, because I know how many hands will go up. My hand is up. We did that, right? But that's not differentiating. I'm not saying you shouldn't do that, right? And so some of this, there can be some element of we're keeping up, right? You don't want to be not spending and falling behind, right? But you want to find yourselves on the top side of this. So the one that I want to talk about here today, and this is where hopefully this doesn't end up being buzzwordy, but this is sort of you'll certainly hear some terms that people are using out there, is really the idea of how do we use Gen AI to create AI agents, which should really start to change. This isn't just, I'm going to implement a chatbot, right? This is actually using these systems in a much more powerful way to really change whole different processes and systems within our organizations. So today, and by today, I mean for as long as we've been using data in organizations to try to solve business problems, the last mile is often the hardest part for us, right? We've built a dashboard. Or more to the point, we've built 10,000 dashboards, 8,000 of which haven't been looked at in the last 12 months, right? I have a team of 20 data scientists. We've built 15 models in the last 12 months, and one of those is in production. And the rest are just really fancy code gathering dust somewhere. Or we've implemented those, and those are models embedded into a front-end system that our sort of user population and community does everything they can to work around that algorithm because they don't agree with the output. Has anybody experienced any of these things? I'm going to go with probably, right? And at the end of the day, like, there's real business problems out there that people are trying to solve, that we're trying to provide them with data, with algorithms, with systems that make that easier for them. But it's very, very hard to build the stuff the right way, to get the adoption, and to do all of that sort of stuff. And like, there's no company that I talk to, there's no CIO, there's no CDO that I've had a conversation with, or more to the point, there's no like other parts of the C-suite. There's no CMO or CEO that I talk to that is like, yep, our data is amazing. Everybody has access to the data they have, that they need to solve this problem, and it's all hunky-dory, right? Like, nobody is in that place, right? I will say, I've talked to CDOs that think that. I've never talked to somebody else in the rest of the C-suite that thinks that. So how do we go? How do we use this new technology to differentiate ourselves and actually change that? The idea here is really, and we obviously are starting to see this, is how do we build these specialized agents? And this is where we're using the power of LLMs to provide access to the knowledge that somebody needs to do their job, or embedding them in processes to make things faster, easier, more relevant, more appropriate, et cetera. This is not just we're going to use an LLM to make easier access to all of the crap that we've got sitting in a SharePoint, so somebody doesn't have to go bother to read the document themselves, they just get a summarization of it. It's how do I get access to the appropriate report or the appropriate dashboard I need to solve the question that I'm asking? How do I get access to, especially when you're talking about like multi-document stuff, right? It's not just from one database, it's from multiple databases. It's how do I'm linking this customer and their specific information I know about them to the relevant policies, to what I know about the pipeline of data or the pipeline of supply chain that they're trying to deal with, et cetera. That we as humans, and more to the point, our users, that's what their job is. How do I know what information to access at a given point in time to solve the problem that I'm trying to do? That takes training, that takes time, that takes experience for those users to be able to get that. How do we accelerate that curve through the use of this technology? So what does that look like? So, our fairly standard process here of, a business person and an executive has a question. They reach out to the analytics team, or they reach out to, their chief of staff or something like that. You email back and forth a bunch of times. The analyst goes off and says, okay, I don't know the answer to this question off the top of my head, but I'm going to go try to figure it out. They dig into whatever the system is, the process. They write some code, or they pull some SQL out, or this or that. Eventually, they've got some results. They then take those, they put it into a PowerPoint or a presentation or something like that. They send it back to the business person who is like, I asked that question like 3 months ago. I don't even know what you're talking about, right? They've forgotten and they've moved off on. Or, I guess maybe in the best case scenario, that analyst worked until like 3 in the morning for 5 days in a row to solve the question to get it back to that. I've been that person. I don't want to do that anymore. Now I'm the business person asking those questions and then moving off to the different topic long before I actually get the answer to the question. So this is not working for anybody in this situation. So the idea is, how do we move this to where there's a layer in between that the business person is interacting with, that I'm asking now, whatever this agent is, here's my question. I need to look at what are my customers that are, most likely to churn in the next quarter, and what are the main drivers of that, and which specific regions are there, and how am I going to get ahead of this, right? That's a conversation I've had, and that's the thing that is a lot of back and forth and a lot of questions. How do I have a system that then will come pull my churn forecast report, some existing things to look for patterns or trends in those customers that we're forecasting to churn? What region are they from? Are they from a specific industry, et cetera? In the background, I've got analysts and data scientists building and updating my churn model, enhancing these systems with new and additional information, tuning those LLMs that are distinctly there to answer those questions, and monitoring the results to actually say, hey, did this actually solve the problem that the person was asking? How is that working for us? This is where we want to really get that, because now I've got an analyst who is working hopefully like a sane life and building the things and knowing that these are all getting used, but it's not this like constant back and forth and tons of manual effort. And hopefully then our business person is getting the answers to the questions that they have to solve business problems and questions in a timely fashion. So let's give an example a little bit more concretely of what that could look like. So I'm looking at sales performance and pipeline health, and I go ahead and ask, here's my question, right? Like, what's the probability of hitting our sales target? And I add some specifics in it, right? Not just like, are we going to hit it or not? Like, where are we weighted? What's our challenge? And what are if we're not going to hit it, why not? And so my agent comes back and says, yeah, here you go. Here's a dashboard that looks at all of what you're trying to do this quarter. Most of your large accounts are with a single sales representative that is causing some risk in this pipeline where deals might slip, right? So that'd be great, right? Because that's a conversation that through a few emails and a few days of work, I could get that response from the analyst on the team to sort of help me make this decision. But how do we make that faster? What does that actually look like in the back end, right? Because this isn't just, I sent a query to an LLM and I got a single response, right? So behind the scenes, we're creating this system. All right, I'd like to do this. Your agent, your agentic system, looks at it and says, okay, there's a number of questions embedded in this. How do I be able to go through that? And so it's going to split out, and then this is that decision process. Where do I send that question? What is going to answer that for me, right? Like a great example of these right now is, we have the Gen AI models. LLMs aren't good at math, right? Because they're language predictors. They're not computation engines, right? And so yes, it knows that 1 + 1 = 2 because you can go out on the internet and there's a few million times, probably a few billion times, that somebody's written 1 + 1 = 2. But how many times has somebody written the sentence 335 + 442 = 775? I don't know if that was right, but okay. So don't quote me on my math. So that's not a question that the LLM can answer itself, right? It needs to access a different system that's going to do that math. So before my question here where I'm saying, where am I doing that? I have a churn model, or I have my sales model that's forecasting that stuff. So I want to look at where the forecast is, but I don't want to just see what the forecast is. I can look up the forecast. There's a system for that. I want to know when the last week of the quarter comes and my sales VPs, Johnny, come to me and say, yeah, I know this deal's that we've been forecasting to close this week for the last 3 months. Yes, it's going to close. Yes, it's going to close. Yes, it's going to close. No, it's not going to close, right? I'm just kidding. Johnny would never do that. Some of his peers, different story. So what's it going to do? It's going to write some SQL. If there's not already a model out there, it's going to gather that historical data. What deals slip, right? I can look at the history of what those forecasts were, and I can see that, yes, of course, inevitably in a quarter, deals some slip. And it's going to pull that data together. It's going to write some machine learning or it's going to write some Python to do some machine learning, to do some forecasting. What are the variables that are there, right? Like, today I can go in and I can ask ChatGPT to give me some code that would do these sorts of things, but let's actually have it go and do this itself. And then may actually say, oh, but what I see is, by the way, you've got, 90% of your deals this quarter are sitting with a single salesperson. Maybe that's a risk. So it's writing some SQL, it's pulling some data, it's writing some Python, or it's using some Python to access some existing models, and finding sort of unknowns in that system. So maybe this has some back and forth, right? Like that's the whole point of these agentic systems is we can sort of continue to improve and refine it, but then that's all going to go back to either this first one or a separate one that's going to sort of aggregate these different responses and look at and then structure how it wants to communicate that back to me. In this case, it's pulled in, it's done a bunch of SQL information, so it actually says, hey, the best way to give these results back is to generate a dashboard. So it's going to go off and write some SQL or some Power BI or something like that, generate a dashboard and give that back to me. It's not, or maybe there's an existing dashboard, whatever that looks like, but it's the system knows where all of these things are in the same way that our typical analyst has in the past. So then I hopefully, or again, is this the perfect answer? Probably not. If I take that answer and run with it, then I'm not doing my job, but it's giving me much more information in a much quicker way than the sort of traditional model looks like. So it's a great idea. There's a lot of applications for this. I'm going to click all 500 times to make all these arrows appear because you guys wouldn't have been able to figure that out yourself. But so look, you can have fine-tuned LLMs that are good for a specific process. There can be big ones for the general piece to sort of create that. There can be small specific ones for helping with this very specific or very arcane part of it. You can have quicker interactions, right? You can put, an RLHF, reinforcement learning through human feedback into this to help improve the systems of those agents over time. You can have it accessing proprietary models, proprietary data, all these different things. So there's a lot of opportunities here. That in and of itself actually creates a problem. Like, how do we decide where we invest this effort and energy? Because we've got sales and marketing, we've got finance, we've got operations, we've got research, we've got HR, we've got, and this is, from the pharma sort of like general, but, so we're going to have logistics teams, we're going to have, maybe retail, we've got like real estate management, we've got all these different teams, and everywhere in your organization is coming and asking for help, right? They don't have all these resources themselves. The whole idea is, we're trying to sort of help scale this out. So there's a very clear sort of decision process you actually need to go through to say, hey, where are we going to spend our time and effort to do these? Because every single one of these 25 functions that I have up here could have a sort of an agent team, right? It's not one agent to rule them all. I mean, maybe we get there someday where there's just like a bot in your Teams or your Slack or whatever that you just get to ask whatever question you ever happen. Maybe that's that's probably a long time from now. So maybe I have, an agent that I go to and ask questions about accounts, or, our sales process, our MedPick stuff, or meeting summaries, right? Like, Johnny wants to know, like, what are the summaries of the, 120 sales calls that his team took this month without going and watching 120 recordings or reading all this sort of stuff. So get those summaries. Follow-ups. Those salespeople who had all of those calls, like, there's an agent to help you. Here's the follow-ups that you had from all of your calls yesterday. Here's the draft email to send, whatever. That type of stuff to help us move through this more quickly. Now, as is always true in the world of tech, there's really sort of like 3 paths that we can take to this solution. On the far left, I can build this all myself, right? I can hire engineers, I can build these systems, I can pull the LLMs in, I can create sort of like all the various API interaction points, all those, the data, all this sort of stuff. On the far right, I can just buy one, right? Like, there's a, I'm sure that there is a like Salesforce adjacent company that will scrape all of your Salesforce data and say, here's your pipeline help, then it's got all this stuff already built in. And then in the middle, you can leverage a platform to build the agents yourself. In terms of hiring and doing all of this yourself, it's not realistic, especially if you're not in tech, but even if you're in tech. This is very, very hard to sort of get the resources and invest this much energy, because it's not just build, it's build, augment, update, maintain forever. On the right side, if I can build that by that Salesforce adjacent pipeline health tool, so can all of my competitors. So there's nothing differentiated about it, unless for some odd reason my Salesforce data is clean. No comment. All right, so how do you decide where to do this, right? This is then where some of that art and science of like, how do we manage and curate sort of our roadmap as a company and decide to where to put our efforts in. This is then it's linked back to what are our core sort of requirements as a company and what are our core advantages? Like, where do we see our ability because we have the right data or we have the right people, or this is just a critical piece for us and we're gonna build that because if I can do this better than my customer, this is gonna help me really go there. And so like maybe it's, you know, this handful here where we're sort of saying these are the things where we either know we have the data, we have the information, or we have the lead, or these are just like where we know the rest of our competitors aren't as good, and if we can get that much better, we can really do that. And so this is really where we see this next couple of years of investment in really making the promise of Gen AI help businesses beyond your HR chatbot. And we, of course, you're here today, we have a biased opinion that, you know, the platform to help you do all of these, to build these, the appropriate ones in here in the middle, is Dataiku, because we can help you build and govern them. But yeah, so thank you very much. Hopefully this was not just 20 minutes of buzzwords, and you all learned at least something here today. Thank you.